I was being sold my own humiliation when a stranger decided he wanted to marry me. That was the exact moment my life split in two. The foreclosure notice was still folded in my purse, sharp as a blade against my palm, when I walked into the charity event at the Langford Hotel. I was only there because the bank manager had promised 5 minutes. 5 minutes to beg for more time before they took my family's bakery. Instead, I saw Mason first. My ex-perfect suit. Perfect smile. Perfect timing. He looked me over like I was a mistake he had once almost made. "Claire," he said, loud enough for the nearby donors to hear, "still trying to save that little bakery?" Heat rushed into my face. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to vanish. Instead, I lifted my chin. I am still trying. Unlike some people, I do not quit when things get inconvenient. His smile sharpened. "You do not need a loan. You need help. Come work for my mother again. Maybe then I can convince the bank to be merciful." Merciful. He said it like I should thank him for the privilege of kneeling. Before I could answer, his mother stepped in wearing pearls and cruelty. She glanced at my dress, my shoes, my whole life. "Claire, pride is expensive. Especially when you cannot even keep the lights on." A few people laughed. Soft. Polite. Worse than loud. My stomach dropped, but I refused to let them see it. "I would rather lose everything," I said, "than belong to people like you." I walked away before my voice could break. I made it to the marble hallway outside the ballroom before the tears hit. Just one. I wiped it off hard. Then I heard a man's voice behind me. Calm. Low. Controlled. "You should have let him keep talking." I turned. Tall. Plain dark coat. No luxury watch. No rich man polish. But his eyes were wrong for a nobody. Too steady. Too cold. He had seen everything. "Excuse me?" I snapped. He looked past me toward the ballroom doors, then back at me. Men like Mason usually bury themselves if you give them one more minute. I should have walked away. Instead, I stayed. Maybe because I was angry. Maybe because he did not look at me with pity. "Do you always eavesdrop on public humiliation?" I asked. "Only when it is badly done," he said. Then his gaze dropped to the foreclosure notice sticking out of my purse. "Not nosy. Precise. You need money. I need a wife. Marry me, Claire, and we can solve both problems tonight." For 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. The strangest part was not that a man I had never met wanted to marry me. It was that, for one reckless second, I almost asked him yes before I asked him why. I stared at him in that marble hallway like he had stepped out of the wrong story. He did not look rich. He did not look desperate either. Just still. Controlled. Dangerous in the quietest possible way. "You do not even know me," I said. "I know enough," he answered. "You need a legal solution fast. I need a wife for 6 months. We help each other. Then we walk away." My pulse slammed hard against my throat. "And what exactly do you get out of marrying a stranger?" His eyes did not move. Privacy. That was it. One word. Flat. Clean. Useless. I should have laughed in his face. Instead, I asked, "How much?" He named a number big enough to save the bakery, catch up the loan, and keep my mother from losing the only thing my father left us. My stomach twisted. No normal man offered money like that in a hotel hallway. "This is insane," I said. "Probably," he replied. "But it is still your best option." I demanded proof. Not promises. Not charm. Proof. He gave me an address 10 blocks away and told me to see his place before I made a decision. So I went. The apartment was small. Clean. Almost too clean. Cheap furniture. White walls. One coffee mug in the sink. No hidden luxury. No signs of a scam built on shiny lies. If anything, it looked painfully ordinary. He stood by the window while I checked every corner like I expected the truth to jump out and bite me. Disappointed? He asked. Confused, I said. Good. Confused people think harder. I turned on him. Stop talking like you already know I will say yes. He walked to the table, opened a folder, and slid it toward me. A simple contract. 6 months. Legal marriage. Agreed financial support. No personal interference beyond public appearances if needed. No questions he was not ready to answer. That last line made my jaw lock. You want trust without honesty. No, he said. I want terms. Trust is more expensive. I hated that answer because part of me understood it. I hated him a little more because I needed what he was offering. I picked up the pen. My hand shook once. Just once. This is a transaction, I said. Not loyalty. Not love. Not trust. His gaze held mine, unreadable as ever. Then sign, Claire. And I did. 20 minutes after I signed that contract, I was standing in City Hall holding a marriage license with a man who still felt more like a threat than a husband. The clerk smiled like this was sweet. It was not. It was fast, cold, and unreal. Ethan stood beside me in a dark coat, calm as stone, while I tried to ignore the sound of my own heartbeat. Do you, Claire Bennett, take Ethan Cole as your lawful husband? I almost laughed at the word lawful. My whole life felt 1 inch away from collapse, and now I was trying to save it with a stranger's last name. I do, I said. Ethan did not hesitate. I do. That was it. 1 signature. 1 ring. 1 reckless decision I could never take back. I expected regret to hit first. Instead, the first thing I felt was exhaustion. Then humiliation found me again. We had barely stepped out onto the courthouse steps when Mason's mother spotted us across the sidewalk. Of course she did. Gloria Cole moved toward us in a cream coat and sharp heels, looking like judgment wrapped in cashmere. Her eyes landed on Ethan, then on me, and the smile she gave me was cruel enough to cut. Well, she said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, I knew you were desperate, Claire. I just did not realize you would marry beneath yourself to prove a point. Heat rushed up my neck. I wanted Ethan to say something. Anything. But he just stood there, quiet, unreadable, letting her look him over like he was cheap furniture left on a curb. Gloria gave a soft laugh. At least Mason escaped in time. I turned to Ethan, waiting for anger, pride, a pulse. Nothing. He opened the car door for me and said only, get in. That silence burned worse. Then her insult. By the time we reached my mother's bakery, I was furious at him for making me feel like I had married exactly what everyone thought I had. Inside, Mom was hunched over the counter with a legal notice in her shaking hands. Claire, she said, voice thin, I do not understand this. I took the paper, but Ethan took it from me first. His eyes moved once down the page. Then his whole expression changed. Sharper. Colder. Smarter. This clause is wrong, he said. They are trying to force acceleration without proper notice. Do not call them back. Not yet. My mother blinked. I blinked harder. How do you know that? I asked. Ethan handed the notice back like he had not just sliced through legal language in 3 seconds flat. I have seen worse, he said. That was all. But I stared at him, and for the first time since City Hall, one thought hit me harder than fear. I had not married a random broke man. I had married a man who knew far more than he was admitting. And I suddenly wanted to know exactly who had just become my husband. That night, I followed my new husband into an apartment that looked so ordinary it almost offended me. After the courthouse, after Gloria's contempt, after the way Ethan sliced through legal language like he had done it 100 times before, I had expected something. A crack. A tell. A mistake. Instead I got white walls, cheap shelves, a narrow couch, and a kitchen so clean it felt staged. "This is where you live?" I asked. Ethan set my bag down by the hallway without looking at me. "You say that like you were expecting a mansion." I folded my arms. I was expecting a clue. That got the smallest pause out of him. Not guilt. Not fear. Just a pause. Then he turned and pointed down the short hall. "Your room is the one on the left. Mine is on the right. Bathroom in the middle. We keep this simple." Simple. That word almost made me laugh. Nothing about this felt simple. Still, I nodded because I needed rules more than answers. "Fine," I said. "Separate rooms. Shared expenses. No fake romance." "Agreed," he said. Then he added, "And no questions I am not ready to answer." I stared at him. That sounds less like a boundary and more like a warning. He met my eyes at last. "Take it however you want." I should have hated him more than I already did. The problem was, I could not stop noticing how precise he was. The way his shoes were lined up. The way every dish was already dried and put away. The way he moved like he wasted nothing. The next morning, I came back from the bakery to find him under the front sink with his sleeves rolled up, fixing a leak I had not even told him about. Water dripped down his wrist. Tools were laid out in a neat row on the tile. "You know plumbing too?" I asked. He tightened one last fitting and stood. "The pipe knew less than you do." It was easier to deal with. I almost smiled. Almost. Then he picked up his jacket and headed for the door. "I have work," he said. "Work where?" He opened the door but did not step through yet. "Wherever people pay." That answer irritated me all over again. By afternoon, I saw him at the bakery, rebuilding a broken storage shelf my mother had been complaining about for weeks. Mom looked at him like maybe I had not made a total disaster of my life after all. That should have made me feel better. It did not. It made me suspicious. Because broke men did not usually quote legal clauses from memory, fix plumbing in 10 minutes, and build like they had done it their whole lives. So when Ethan washed the sawdust off his hands and said, "It should hold now," I heard myself ask the question I was starting to hate. "Who exactly are you?" He dried his hands on a towel, calm as ever. "Your husband," he said. And somehow that answer made me trust him less. I knew I had married the wrong man the second I had to introduce him at the supplier meeting. The conference room at Belridge Foods smelled like burnt coffee and polished wood, and every person at that table looked richer, calmer, and more secure than I felt. I had spent all morning rehearsing numbers in my head, trying to save the bakery contract that kept half our shelves stocked. Then Mason walked in with his fiancée on his arm and that same polished smile that always meant trouble. His eyes flicked to Ethan beside me, to Ethan's plain coat, to the scuffed heel of one shoe, and I saw the judgment land before he even opened his mouth. "Claire," he said, almost warmly, "you really brought him?" My face went hot. "I brought my husband," I said. Mason's fiancée laughed first. "That is your husband?" I thought he was the delivery guy. A few people at the table shifted. Not enough to stop it. Just enough to enjoy it. I felt that old humiliation crawl up my spine, slow and familiar. Mason leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. "You always did confuse struggle with dignity," he said. "Marrying a broke man does not make you loyal. It makes you reckless." I wanted Ethan to shut him down. Just once. Just one sharp sentence. One claim. One sign that I had not chained my life to a man who folded under pressure. Instead, Ethan only pulled out the empty chair beside me and said, "Sit down, Claire." That was it. No defense. No anger. Nothing. The silence hit harder than Mason's voice. I sat because I had no choice, but every second after that felt like being skinned alive in a business jacket. I pushed through the pitch anyway. I laid out my numbers. My margins. My repayment plan. My hands stayed steady. My stomach did not. When the supplier's vice president finally spoke, his tone was flat. We will review internally. Which usually meant no. Outside the building, I turned on Ethan so fast I almost surprised myself. Why did you even come? I snapped. To stand there and let them make a fool out of me? He looked at me with that same infuriating calm. Did you finish your presentation? That is not the point. It is exactly the point, he said. Then he opened the passenger door like nothing in me was breaking. I hated him for that composure. I hated myself more because I got in anyway. But before he could close the door, my phone rang. Belridge Foods. I answered with shaking fingers. The vice president's assistant spoke quickly. Miss Bennett, our legal team would like to reopen negotiations on your contract terms. There are concerns about a clause in the current draft. I froze. Ethan did not react. Not even a blink. And that was when the humiliation inside me shifted into something far more dangerous. Because my husband had said almost nothing in that room. And somehow, everything had just changed. The worst part was that Ethan did not even look surprised when Belridge called me back. He drove us home in the same steady silence, one hand on the wheel, eyes forward, like supplier contracts reversed themselves every day. I lasted exactly 4 blocks. Did you do that? I asked. He did not glance at me. Do what? Do not insult me. My voice came out sharper than I meant. They were ready to bury me in that room, and 10 minutes later their legal team suddenly finds a problem with the contract. Did you do that? He finally looked over, just once. You gave a solid presentation. I laughed, short and bitter. That is not an answer. It is the one I am giving. I turned toward the window before I said something reckless. That calm of his was becoming its own kind of violence. By the time we reached the apartment, my anger had curdled into suspicion. I followed him inside, shut the door, and blocked his path to the kitchen. If you are going to stand beside me in public and act useless, then fix things in private like some ghost. I deserve to know what game I am in. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened. You are not in a game, Claire. Then tell me the truth. No, just that. One word. Clean. Brutal. My chest tightened. You really expect me to trust a man who keeps saving me with one hand and lying with the other? He set his keys down with exact care. I expect you to do what you have been doing since I met you. Survive what is in front of you. That answer made me want to scream. Instead, I stepped back. Because if I stayed close another second, I might have asked why his refusal hurt more than Mason's insults ever had. Later that night, after I had finally fallen asleep on top of the covers, voices woke me through the thin apartment wall. Not from inside. From the hallway. A woman's voice. Sharp. Controlled. Furious. He cannot keep disappearing like this, she said. Another woman answered, lower and smoother. The board meeting is in 72 hours. If Ethan does not show, Vivian will force the announcement without him. My body went cold. Ethan. The board. Vivian. I moved closer to the door, pulse hammering. Find him, the first voice said. And if that woman is still with him, I want her name by morning. Then heels clicked away. Silence dropped hard. I stood there barefoot in the dark, staring at the door to my husband's room, and for the first time I knew one thing for certain. Ethan was not hiding from poverty. He was hiding from power. I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark with my eyes open, listening to the silence on the other side of Ethan's door and wondering what kind of broke man had women in heels hunting him before sunrise. By morning, he was already dressed, already calm, already impossible. He stood in the kitchen pouring coffee like nothing had cracked open the night before. I watched him over the rim of my mug and said, "Do people usually whisper about board meetings outside your apartment, or was that just a special occasion?" His hand stopped for half a second. That was all. Then he set the pot down. "You were supposed to be asleep." "That is not an answer. Neither is snooping." The word hit hard because it was close enough to sting. I stepped closer anyway. If I am married to a lie, I get to look at the seams. His gaze locked on mine. Cold. Sharp. Then stop tugging at things you do not understand. He left for work 5 minutes later. I waited 20. Then I followed him. I hated myself a little for that. I hated him more for making it feel necessary. Ethan did not take the bus. He did not walk to some random job site. A black town car picked him up 3 blocks from the apartment, like he had done that exact thing 100 times before. My pulse kicked hard. I grabbed a cab and told the driver to keep up. We crossed downtown and stopped near a glass tower so polished it looked untouchable. Ethan got out, straightened his coat, and walked toward a private entrance with the kind of confidence no broke man ever had. Then a doorman opened the door before Ethan even reached it. Like they knew him. Like they had been waiting. My stomach dropped. I jumped out of the cab too fast and nearly twisted my ankle on the curb. I pushed forward, trying to catch one more glimpse, one more clue, but a familiar voice cut across the sidewalk before I could reach the door. "Claire." I froze. "Mason." Of course. He stood outside a coffee bar across the street, looking me over with that same smug curiosity I wanted to slap off his face. Then his eyes flicked to the building, then back to me, and his smile turned ugly. "Let me guess," he said. "You moved on from marrying broke men to chasing rich ones?" Heat rushed into my face. "Mind your own business." He stepped closer. "You always did have terrible taste in strategy." By the time I looked back at the tower, Ethan was gone. Completely. Vanished into polished glass and secrets. I turned to leave, furious, but when I reached the apartment that night, Ethan was already there. Sitting on the couch. Waiting. He looked up once and said, "Where were you today, Claire?" And suddenly I could not tell which one of us had really been followed. The way Ethan asked where I had been made one thing painfully clear. He did not sound like a broke man worried about being followed. He sounded like a man used to knowing everything before anyone else did. I set my bag down and stared back at him. At the bakery, I lied first. Reflex. Defense. He held my gaze long enough to make the room feel smaller. Try again. My pulse kicked hard. I wanted to throw the truth at him. I wanted to ask who opened private doors for him downtown. Instead I crossed my arms and said, maybe I was out learning who I married. Something cold flashed in his face, then disappeared. And did you learn anything useful? Only that you lie better than most people breathe. For 1 second, I thought he might finally break. Explain. Fight. Claim something real. But he only leaned back and said, then stop chasing fragments and ask the right question. I hated that answer so much I went to bed angry and woke up angrier. By noon the next day, that anger had nowhere to go except into work. I was behind the counter boxing cinnamon rolls when the bell over the bakery door chimed, and every head in the room turned at once. The woman who stepped inside did not belong under our flickering menu board. Cream coat. Sharp heels. Quiet money. She looked like the hallway voice from the night before had grown a face. Her gaze found me immediately. Claire Bennett, she said, smooth as glass. I was curious. I set the box down. About pastries? Her smile barely moved. About the woman Ethan married instead of using common sense. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. You walked into the wrong bakery if you came looking for drama. She moved closer, taking in the chipped paint, the old tables, the faded family photos on the wall. No, she said softly. I came to see how far he had fallen. That one landed hard. Not because of the insult. Because of the way she said he. Personal. Possessive. Precise. I straightened. You know my husband? Know him, she said. Claire, there are women raised from birth for men like Ethan. Before I could answer, the front door opened again. Ethan stepped inside, saw her, and all the air changed. His face went flat. Dangerous. Controlled in a way that made my skin tighten. Olivia, he said. Just her name. Nothing more. She turned, almost pleased. You really did disappear into this place. Ethan walked straight to the counter and stopped beside me, close enough for everyone to feel the line he was drawing. You need to leave. Olivia's eyes slid to me, then back to him. You could have chosen better. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Leave. She held his stare for one long second, then smiled at me like she knew something I did not and walked out. The bell over the door rang once. Silence hit after it. I turned to Ethan, my chest tight with fresh humiliation and something worse. Who is Olivia? He looked at the closed door, not at me. Then he finally said, someone from before. And somehow that answer made the room feel more dangerous than if he had told me everything. I found the watch by accident, which is exactly the kind of lie people tell right before their lives get worse. Ethan was out. My mother needed the spare receipt book I had shoved into the hall drawer the day we moved in, and I was all ready. Irritated enough to yank things open harder than I should have. The drawer stuck. I pulled again. Something slid loose from the back and hit the floor with a clean, expensive sound. Not cheap metal. Not ordinary. A watch. Heavy. Black face. Seamless steel. The kind of thing men like Mason would brag about and men like Ethan should not own. My pulse kicked hard. Beneath it was a card. Thick stock. One line embossed in silver. Hayes Capital. I just stood there staring like the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless. They did not. When Ethan came home, I was waiting at the table with the watch and the card lined up between us like evidence. He stopped the second he saw them. Not startled. Worse. Resigned. You went through my things, he said. Your things fell out of a drawer in my apartment. I pushed the card toward him. What is Hayes Capital? His jaw tightened once. A place I used to work around. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Around? He picked up the watch, turned it once in his hand, then set it back down. I knew people there. People do not leave this behind if you were just some errand boy in a copy room. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something under all that control. Not fear. Pain. Old. Buried. I told you I left that life, he said quietly. I did not say it was simple. That should have helped. It should have made me soften. Instead it made me angrier, because pain was not truth, and I was tired of collecting pieces from a man who spoke in locked doors. Was Olivia part of that life too? I asked. Ethan did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. He moved past me toward the sink, and I hated that he could still make retreat look controlled. I was still standing there, furious and strangely wounded by a past he would not let me touch, when a crash exploded from downstairs. I ran to the window. My breath stopped cold. The bakery glass was streaked in fresh white paint. 2 words. Big enough for the whole street to see. Gold digger. For 1 second I could not move. Then Ethan was beside me, looking down at the damage with a face so Still it scared me. And suddenly the watch, Olivia, Hayes Capital, all of it twisted into one awful thought. Whoever was coming for him had just decided to come for me too. I woke up to the sound of scraping glass, and for one terrified second I thought they had come back to finish the job. Instead, when I looked down from the apartment window, I saw Ethan standing alone in the gray light before sunrise, sleeves rolled up, a bucket at his feet, scrubbing the words off my family's bakery before my mother could see them. Gold digger. The paint was still there, but fading under his hands. Something in my chest pulled tight so fast it hurt. I ran downstairs without even grabbing my coat. Why did you not wake me? I demanded the second I pushed through the door. Ethan did not stop moving. Because your mother opens at 6. He dragged the brush hard across the glass. And she does not need this as her first sight of the day. The street was empty. Cold. Quiet. My humiliation was not. I grabbed a rag and started wiping the lower pane beside him, furious that he was helping, furious that I needed it, furious that whoever did this had managed to hit exactly where I was weakest. This is because of you, I said before I could stop myself. Ethan went still for half a beat, then kept scrubbing. Maybe. That answer should have made me angrier. Somehow, it made me more tired. By the time the sun started pushing color into the street, the words were gone, but my hands were shaking. I dropped the rag into the bucket and leaned against the counter inside the bakery, suddenly too exhausted to hold myself up the same way I always did. I am so tired, I said, and my own voice startled me. Thin. Frayed. Honest in a way I hated. I am tired of being looked at like I am cheap. Tired of defending every inch of my life. Tired of not knowing whether I married a man or a secret. Ethan stood across from me, silent long enough that I nearly regretted saying any of it. Then he stepped closer, not soft, not tender, just certain. Then stopped standing alone. The words landed harder than comfort had any right to. I looked at him and saw the same unreadable man, the same controlled face, the same walls. But I also saw the bucket. The brush. The freezing hands that had cleaned my shame off the glass before dawn. Neither of us said anything for a while after that. He made coffee in the back office with the old machine my father used to swear at, and somehow that ordinary sound filled the silence better than apologies would have. I wrapped both hands around the paper cup he gave me. If you are helping me now, I said quietly, then no more half-truths. Ethan held my gaze over the rim of his own cup. I can help you, he said. Honesty will take longer. That should have closed me off again. It should have. Instead I took one slow sip of burnt coffee and nodded once, because for the first time since this marriage began, I felt less alone than angry. Which would have been comforting, if it had not frightened me so much. 3 days after someone painted gold digger across my family's windows, I was standing in the bakery kitchen watching my fake husband frost cupcakes like he had been born in an apron, and that felt more dangerous than the vandalism. You are doing that wrong, I said, mostly because I needed something to push against. Ethan looked down at the pastry bag in his hand, then back at me. It is frosting, Claire. Not open heart surgery. I should not have laughed. I did anyway. Brief. Sharp. Real. His mouth almost moved with mine, but not quite. We were preparing for the neighborhood relaunch event Mom had dreamed up to prove the bakery was still standing, still ours, still worth saving. I handled the menu, the register, the panic. Ethan handled everything else. Delivery timing. Folding tables. A broken extension cord. A last-minute sign bracket that somehow stopped wobbling the second he touched it. By noon, the place was full. Kids pressed their hands to the glass case. Neighbors lined up for cinnamon rolls. And Ethan, the man who spoke like every word cost him something, was somehow kneeling to tie a little girl's shoelace because she had started crying in front of the drink cooler. There, he told her, calm as ever. Now you can outrun your brother properly. The girl giggled. Her mother smiled. I just stared. You are good at this, I said later, when we had one quiet second behind the counter. Ethan wiped flour off his hands with a dish towel. At shoelaces? At making people trust you. He held my gaze for one beat too long. That is not the same thing. The words landed deeper than they should have. Because I knew exactly what he meant, and because part of me had already started doing it anyway. The afternoon passed in warm noise and sugar and the kind of ordinary happiness I had stopped expecting from my own life. For one reckless hour, Ethan did not feel like a lie I had married. He felt like a man standing beside me. That was the problem. Just after closing, while I was carrying empty boxes to the alley, I heard the faint click of a camera shutter. I turned fast, but whoever had been there was already gone. When I came back inside, Ethan was stacking chairs, sleeves rolled up, looking infuriatingly steady. What happened? He asked. I looked toward the dark front windows, my pulse climbing again. I think someone was taking pictures. And suddenly that soft, fragile day no longer felt like ours at all. The next morning, my face was on a gossip site before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. Not just mine. Mine and Ethan's. One photo showed him leaning over my shoulder at the bakery register, his hand braced beside mine. Another caught us laughing in the kitchen, close enough to look intimate, soft enough to look real. The headline made my stomach turn. Small-town baker linked to mystery heir tied to Heir's capital. I read it twice, then a third time, because some part of me still thought the words might become less humiliating if I stared hard enough. They did not. Mom came in from the front and found me frozen by the counter. Claire, she asked. I turned the screen off too fast. Too late. She had already seen my face. My phone buzzed again before I could lie. Mason. Of course. I answered because I was too angry not to. His voice came smooth and satisfied. You move fast, he said. 1 week you marry a nobody. The next week you are apparently circling rich men connected to Heir's capital. My hand tightened around the phone. You do realize gossip is not evidence, right? He laughed softly. No, but patterns are. Then he dropped his voice. Be careful, Claire. Women like you do not survive in circles like that unless someone put you there. I hung up before I said something I would regret, but the damage was done. Women like you. Cheap. Convenient. Suspect. Same insult. New packaging. When Ethan came in through the back door an hour later, one look at my face told him enough. I shoved the article toward him. This is your world spilling into mine again. He scanned the screen once, and every trace of warmth from yesterday disappeared from his face. I did not leak this, he said. I did not say you did. I hated that my voice shook anyway. But somehow every time I get close to you, my life gets smaller, louder, uglier. Ethan pulled out his phone immediately, already moving into that cold, silent mode that meant he was solving something without letting me inside it. What are you doing? I asked. Finding the source. Without telling me? His thumb stilled over the screen. Would telling you first make the article disappear? I had no answer for that. Which only made me angrier. He stepped closer, low and controlled. Claire, this was not random. I know that. Then stop assuming I am the one aiming at you. The words hit harder than I expected, because part of me had been doing exactly that. Before I could answer, the bell over the front door rang, and a woman in a navy suit walked in holding a leather folder and a face full of polished judgment. She asked for me by full name. Then she looked at Ethan once and said, Mrs. Heir requests a meeting. Today. My blood went cold. Mrs. Heir. Not Olivia. Not gossip. Something worse. Something older. Ethan's jaw locked so hard I heard it in the silence. And suddenly the article on my phone felt less like gossip and more like an invitation into a war I still did not understand. By the time I arrived at the charity lunch, I already knew it was a trap. Nothing that came from Ethan's world ever arrived wrapped in honesty first. The restaurant was all white roses, crystal water glasses, and women who wore judgment better than jewelry. The hostess smiled too brightly when she led me to the private room, and the second I stepped inside, every conversation paused just long enough for me to feel the cut. Vivian Hayes sat at the center of the table in pale silk and perfect posture, like the whole room had been built around her approval. She looked up at me once and said, "Claire. Thank you for joining us." "Thank you." As if I had been invited, not summoned. I took the empty seat because leaving would have looked like weakness, and I had already been fed enough of that. For the first 10 minutes, they barely spoke to me directly. That was part of the design. Charity numbers. Gallery openings. College boards. Last names I was clearly supposed to recognize. Then Vivian turned, elegant as a knife. "I hear your family owns a bakery," she said. "How quaint." A woman to her left smiled into her champagne. Another asked whether I had always planned to marry so quickly, or whether sudden opportunity simply required sudden action. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept my spine straight. "I did not realize this was an interview," I said. Vivian's smile did not move. "It is not. Interviews imply qualifications." That one landed hard. The table rewarded her with soft laughter. I wanted to throw my water in her face. Instead I folded my hands and said, "Then I suppose this is just theater. In that case, you should know I do not scare easily." Her eyes sharpened for the first time. "No," she said. "Just expensively." Then she began asking about my father's debts, my mother's business, my education, my marriage. Every question was polished. Every one meant to strip me down in public without ever raising her voice. By the time I stood to leave, my pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Vivian lifted her glass and gave me one last measured look. "Whatever Ethan has told you," she said, "women from your world do not survive in his." I picked up my bag. My hand shook once. Only once. "Then it is a good thing," I said, "that I have survived much worse than rich women with table manners." I walked out before the silence behind me could turn into laughter again. I made it to the sidewalk before the sting in my chest turned into something hotter than humiliation. Rage. Clean. Sharp. Useful. I had just reached for my phone when a black car stopped at the curb, and Ethan stepped out. One look at my face was enough. His expression changed instantly. Cold. Dangerous. "What happened?" he asked. I swallowed hard and said the one thing that made his eyes go dead still. "Your mother wanted a closer look at what you married. I thought Ethan would take me home after that. Let me cool down. Let the insult settle into one more private wound I would have to carry alone." Instead, he opened the passenger door of the black car and said, "Get in." His voice was flat enough to warn me not to argue. So I did. We drove 20 minutes in silence, deeper into a part of the city that smelled like money and polished stone, until the car stopped in front of a hotel glowing with chandeliers and camera flashes. I looked up at the banner over the entrance and felt my stomach drop. Hayes Foundation Winter Gala. "Ethan," I said carefully, "why are we here?" He stepped out, came around the car, and opened my door himself. "Because my family seems to have forgotten something." I stared at him. "And what exactly is that?" His gaze held mine, cold and absolute. "You are not theirs to humiliate." That should have felt comforting. It did not. It felt like stepping onto a stage in someone else's war. Inside, the ballroom turned silent in pieces. First the donors near the door. Then the women at the champagne tower. Then the men clustered around the auction display. Heads turned. Conversations slowed. Eyes landed on Ethan like he had returned from the dead. I felt it then, the shift in the room. Not toward me. Toward him. People were not surprised to see a broke husband at a gala. They were stunned to see Ethan. Which meant the truth was bigger than I had let myself imagine. Vivian stood near the center of the room in silver silk, one hand still resting on a crystal flute. Olivia was beside her in dark green, perfectly composed, until she saw me on Ethan's arm. That was the first crack. Small. Sharp. Real. A man from the board stepped forward with a relieved smile that did not reach his eyes. "Ethan," he said, "we were beginning to wonder whether you planned to make an appearance at all." Ethan did not even look at him. He looked at Vivian. Then at the room. Then he placed one hand, firm and unmistakable, at the small of my back. "I am here now," he said. His voice did not rise, but every word cut clean through the ballroom. "And since there seems to be confusion, let me make this simple. Claire is my wife." The silence after that hit like a shockwave. I felt it in my ribs. In my throat. In the sudden way no one dared smile at me anymore. Vivian's face changed by less than an inch. Olivia's by much more. For one impossible second, I understood the fantasy every woman like me gets punished for wanting. To be chosen. Publicly. Decisively. In a room built to reject you. But before I could turn and ask what any of this meant, Ethan's hand left my back. He stepped away as fast as he had claimed me, already moving toward the men waiting near the stage. I caught his sleeve. "Ethan." He stopped, but he did not face me. "Stay here," he said quietly. "I will handle this." Then he walked into the center of his world and left me standing in the aftershock of a sentence that changed everything without explaining anything at all. The first time Ethan called me his wife in public, the room changed. The second time I faced him in private, I wanted answers badly enough to break. He came back to the apartment after midnight, jacket over one arm, tie loosened, expression locked down so hard it made me angry all over again. I was waiting in the kitchen with all the lights on. "You do not get to do that and disappear," I said before he could speak. He set his keys on the counter with maddening precision. "Do what?" I stared at him. "Claim me in front of a ballroom full of people who looked ready to kneel if you breathed the wrong way, then act like I should not ask what any of it meant." For a second, neither of us moved. Then Ethan looked at me and said, "It meant exactly what I said. You are my wife." The words hit low and hard. Not soft. Not romantic. Worse. Solid. I hated that part of me wanted to believe them. "Then tell me." "The truth," I said. "All of it." He exhaled once and leaned back against the counter, shoulders tight. "I come from money," he said at last. "A lot of it. More than you should have had to deal with. I left that world for reasons I cannot explain yet." I laughed, sharp and tired. "You keep acting like mystery is the same thing as honesty." "It is not," he said. "It is the best I can give you right now." I searched his face for performance and found something worse. Strain. Real strain. Was Olivia part of that world? I asked. His eyes shifted, just barely. Yes. One word. Clean. Fatal. My chest tightened in a way I did not want to name. "Were you with her?" He went still. "Not the way you think." That was not enough. It should have pushed me backward, but instead it pulled me closer to the edge of something I did not trust. Ethan looked at me like he was about to say more. Something real this time. Something dangerous. "Claire," he said quietly, and the sound of my name in his mouth changed the whole room. Then his phone rang. He checked the screen, and whatever softness had almost surfaced vanished. Gone. He answered on the first ring. "What happened?" Silence. Then his face turned cold. He looked at me once and said, "The bakery mortgage was just moved again." Every warm, reckless thing in me shut down at once. Because in my life, honesty never arrived alone. It always came dragging a new disaster behind it. By morning, the bakery mortgage had a new owner and a new deadline, and suddenly my marriage felt less like a bad decision and more like a trap with paperwork. I sat across from the lender's attorney in a cramped office that smelled like toner and old coffee, trying to keep my hands still while he slid the updated documents toward me. "The debt has been transferred to Greyline Holdings," he said. "They are within their rights to accelerate collection." I looked down at the name and felt my stomach turn. I have never heard of Greyline. That is not legally relevant. Of course it was not. Nothing human ever was once money got involved. Ethan sat beside me in silence, but I felt him change the second he saw the company name. Not visibly. More like the air around him tightened. "We will need a full chain of transfer," he said. The attorney smiled without warmth. "Your client is not entitled to that yet." My client. Not wife. Not person. Just one more weak target someone expected to fold. Outside the office, I rounded on Ethan before we even reached the curb. "You knew that name." He kept his voice even. "I recognized the structure." "That is not an answer. It is the one I can give right now." I laughed once, sharp with disbelief. "Do you hear yourself? Every single time the ground shifts under me, you act like you are already 3 steps ahead and still refuse to tell me why." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something dangerous in it. Not anger. Calculation. "Because this may not be about your debt anymore," he said. "It may be about me." The words hit so hard I went cold. What does that even mean? It means Greyline is the kind of shell company people use when they do not want their name on the attack. Attack. The word should have sounded dramatic. It did not. It sounded true. That was the part one hated. Ethan made 2 calls that afternoon from the apartment balcony, low and controlled, too far away for me to catch the words. By evening, a boutique law firm I had never contacted was suddenly requesting documents on my behalf. Ethan denied arranging it. I did not believe him. "You cannot keep moving pieces around me like I am too fragile to see the board," I snapped. He stepped closer, jaw tight. "And you cannot keep assuming I am the one moving first." That stopped me. Not because I trusted him. Because part of me did. Just enough to make it worse. Later that night, while I was locking up, I found him standing alone in the dark bakery, staring at the mortgage papers spread across the counter. His face was unreadable. His voice was not. "Claire," he said quietly, "if they came after this property before they came after me, then this started earlier than I thought." I stared at him, pulse climbing again. Because in that moment, I finally understood the shape of the fear between us. I had married a secret. But the secret might have chosen me first. The morning I nearly dropped a tray of hot rolls because the room tilted under me, Ethan caught it before it hit the floor. 1 second I was standing behind the bakery counter pretending I could outrun stress with caffeine and stubbornness. The next, my knees went soft and the metal tray was sliding out of my hands. Ethan moved fast. Faster than anyone should have needed to. He set the tray down, steadied my elbow, and looked at me with that flat, unreadable focus that somehow felt more intimate than panic. "Sit," he said. "I am fine," I lied. He did not even bother arguing. He just took the order pad out of my hand and repeated, quieter this time, "Claire. Sit." I hated how quickly my body obeyed when the rest of me wanted to fight. For the next hour he ran the front counter, handled customers, and brought me water like this had become his job overnight. Mom hovered once, worried, but Ethan told her, she needs 20 minutes, not sympathy. Strangely, that worked better. By afternoon he had me back at the apartment, a pharmacy bag on the table, tea steeping in the chipped mug I always used, and that same calm command in every movement. "You are overworked, underfed, and angry all the time," he said, setting cold medicine beside me. "That is not a personality. That is a medical condition." I would have laughed if I had more strength. "Do you rehearse these speeches?" He handed me the mug. "Only for difficult patients." Something in me softened then. Not because he was sweet. Ethan was not sweet. He was careful. Practical. Present. And somehow that got under my skin faster. Later, when I woke from an accidental nap on the couch, a blanket was tucked over me and the apartment was dim except for the kitchen light. Ethan was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes. As he reached for the towel, the fabric pulled back just enough for me to see the pale line running across his forearm. Not fresh. Not small. Not ordinary either. My breath caught before I could hide it. He looked up immediately. What? I shook my head too fast. Nothing. His gaze dropped to the scar, then back to me, and for one strange quiet second, neither of us lied. I did not ask where it came from. He did not. Pretend it was nothing. I only said, very softly, you do not have to take care of everything alone. Ethan went still with the towel in his hand. Then he looked at me in a way that made the room feel too small for both of us. Neither do you, he said. That night, long after I went to bed, I heard him moving through the apartment, restless for the first time since I had known him. And lying there in the dark, half sick and far too aware of him, I realized something dangerous had shifted. I was starting to trust the man I should have been most afraid to need. I did not know then that Ethan was awake in the next room, staring at the ceiling, realizing he no longer wanted this marriage to end when the 6 months were up. I should have trusted the warmth less. That was my first mistake. The second was carrying Ethan lunch like I had any right to act like a real wife in a marriage built on missing pieces. He had left early, distracted, barely touching his coffee, and some reckless part of me wanted to return the care he had shown me the day before. So I packed sandwiches from the bakery, drove downtown, and stood outside the glass tower I had once followed him to in secret. The receptionist hesitated when I gave his name, but a call came through almost immediately. Conference level, she said. Last room on the left. My pulse climbed all the way up in the elevator. By the time I reached the hallway, I could already hear voices through the cracked door. Vivian's came first. Sharp. Controlled. The timing is already unstable. Then Olivia, smooth as silk. If we announce before the quarter closes, the damage can still be contained. I froze. Ethan answered next, low enough that I had to move closer to hear him. I said I will handle it. Handle what? Me. The marriage. The fallout. The air in my lungs turned thin. I looked through the gap and saw Olivia step closer to him, one hand resting lightly on his sleeve like she had done it 100 times before. Vivian did not look surprised. That hurt more than it should have. You cannot keep that girl in the middle of this, Vivian said. Then stop putting her. There, Ethan replied. I should have stayed for the rest. I know that now. But all I heard was enough to destroy the softness I had barely let myself feel. I left before anyone saw me, lunchbox still in my hand, pride breaking in quiet places I could not reach. By the time Ethan came home that night, I had already built a wall out of every half-truth he had ever given me. He found me at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and a face I knew he would read wrong. What happened? He asked. I looked up at him and hated that he still sounded concerned. Nothing, I said. His eyes narrowed. Claire. I said nothing. That one word came out flat enough to end the room. Ethan stood there for one long second, waiting for something I could not give him without admitting how much it hurt. Then he nodded once. Slow. Careful. Fine. He went to his room after that. I stayed where I was, staring at the untouched lunch I had hidden in the trash. For the first time since I married him, I did not feel angry. I felt replaced. And that was so much worse. Olivia invited me herself, which should have been warning enough. The message came through a foundation coordinator with polished wording and no room to refuse. A private donor reception. Quiet. Respectful. Clarifying. By the time I arrived at the rooftop lounge downtown, I already knew none of those words were true. The room was full of women in silk and men who watched everything like gossip was an investment. Olivia greeted me with a smile so flawless it felt rehearsed. "Claire," she said, taking my hand like we were friends, "I am so glad you came." I pulled free before she could enjoy it too much. "Say what you dragged me here to say." Her smile barely shifted. Direct. I can see why Ethan finds that refreshing. That one landed exactly where she meant it to. Then, with perfect timing, she raised her glass and spoke just loud enough for the nearest circle to hear. "I suppose secret marriages always become public eventually." The room changed at once. Faces turned. Whispers started. One man near the bar actually said, "So she is the wife." Wife. Not with respect. With shock. With suspicion. With the exact tone people use when they realize the help somehow made it upstairs. Olivia stepped closer, voice soft enough now to sound intimate. "You do understand what this looks like, do you not? A struggling baker. A hidden heir. A rushed marriage." I kept my spine straight even as my pulse slammed hard against it. "What it looks like is none of your business." It became my business when Ethan made it everyone's. Then she opened the folder in her hand and slid a check toward me. Not small. Not subtle. Enough to bury my family's debt twice over. "Walk away quietly," she said. "No scandal. No press. No more public embarrassment. Take the money and end this before his world crushes you for sport." For one terrible second, I just stared at it. Not because I wanted it. Because I was tired enough to understand exactly why some women would. Olivia saw that pause and smiled like she had already won. I pushed the check back across the table. Hard. "I am not for sale." Her eyes cooled. "Everyone is. The only question is whether they know their price before they are forced to learn it." I turned and walked out before the burn behind my ribs could become tears. The elevator ride down felt endless. By the time I hit the sidewalk, the humiliation had settled into something heavier. Not rage. Not yet. Just the sick, clean ache of realizing I might always be the woman offered money to disappear. Ethan found me there minutes later, breath tighter than usual, eyes scanning my face before the street. "Claire." I laughed once. "Empty." "You are late." His jaw locked. "What did she do?" I looked at him and felt the answer rise like something bitter and final. "Nothing I did not already know," I said. "Your world would rather pay me to leave than let me stay." And for the first time since this marriage began, walking away sounded easier than being chosen. The truth finally came out in the back seat of Ethan's car, parked under a dead streetlight, with my pride still burning from the check Olivia had offered me to disappear. I stared out the window because looking at him felt too dangerous. "Do not take me home yet," I said. My voice was flat. Empty. If I walk back into that apartment without answers, I am done. Silence pressed between us for one long beat. Then Ethan spoke. "My full name is Ethan Hayes." I turned slowly. The words should not have shocked me after everything. They still did. Hayes. Not a connection. Not an old job. Not a man orbiting wealth. The name on the building. The name on the invitations. The name people lowered their voices around. He held my gaze and kept going anyway. "I am the heir apparent to Hayes Capital." I stepped out of public view because there is an internal power struggle, and I needed room to move without being watched every second. I laughed once, and it broke on the way out. "Without being watched?" I said. "You married me." He did not flinch. "Yes." That calm made it worse. Everything suddenly rearranged itself in the ugliest possible shape. The courthouse. Gloria's contempt. Olivia's visit. Vivian's lunch. The ballroom. The gossip leak. The gold digger slur on my family's windows. All of it. Not random. Not separate. All connected to the man sitting 3 feet away from me, acting like he had been protecting me while I drowned in consequences he understood and I did not. You let me stand in those rooms blind, I said. My throat tightened hard enough to hurt. You let people laugh at me. You let me keep thinking I had married a nobody when all along I was the fool and a billionaire's secret. Ethan's voice dropped lower. I was trying to keep you outside the blast radius. I looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who had cleaned paint off my bakery windows before dawn. At the man who had stood beside me. At the man who had lied with his whole life. No, I said, and the word came out sharper than any scream. You made me the blast radius. The silence after that felt final. Ethan did not reach for me. He did not defend himself again. He just sat there wearing the truth at last, and somehow that hurt more than every lie that came before it. I left before sunrise with one duffel bag, my wedding ring still on, and the strange, bitter certainty that taking it off would hurt more than leaving it there. Ethan was awake when I came out of the bedroom. Of course he was. He stood in the kitchen in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled once, like heartbreak had somehow fit into his schedule. His eyes dropped to the bag, then came back to me. Claire. Just my name. Quiet. Careful. Too late. Do not, I said. My voice shook once. I hated that he heard it. Do not stand there and offer me money, lawyers, security, damage control, any of it. I do not want your protection right now. I want distance. His jaw tightened. You are still a target. I was a target the second I married you. The words landed hard between us. He did not argue because he could not. That made it worse. I moved past him, but when I reached the door, he said, low and controlled, at least let a car take you. I turned back then. You still do not understand, do you? I am trying to leave your world, not arrive in it more comfortably. I walked out before he could answer. By noon I was back in the tiny apartment above the bakery, surrounded by old pipes, thin walls, and the smell of cinnamon that used to mean home. Mom did not ask many questions. She looked at my face and decided silence was the kinder mercy. The only person less kind was Mason. He appeared that afternoon with coffee I did not want and concern I trusted even less. I heard, he said, leaning in the bakery doorway like he still had the right. About Ethan Hayes. I went cold. Then hear this too. I am not discussing my marriage with you. Mason lifted one shoulder. Marriage? Claire, it sounds more like a corporate stunt with collateral damage. I should have thrown him out faster. Instead I froze on the word collateral, because that was exactly how it felt. He saw it and pushed harder. You could still get ahead of this, he said. Annul quietly. Save your reputation before his family buries you with the rest of his mess. Reputation. Such a clean word for the way people kept measuring my value by whichever man had most recently claimed me. I stepped closer until he finally had to straighten up. I do not need a rescue plan from you, I said. I need men like you to stop acting like my life becomes real only when one of you signs off on it. His face changed. Then. Not shame. Not regret. Just surprised that I had finally said it out loud. He left. I locked the door behind him. And across the street, parked where no one would notice unless they were looking for him, Ethan sat in a black car and did not get out. He kept his distance exactly the way I had demanded. Somehow that hurt too. Because for the first time since I married him, Ethan Hayes was doing the one thing I could not punish him for. He was respecting the space his lies had earned. The new seizure notice arrived at 9:12 a.m., stamped urgent in red, like the law needed color to make ruin feel official. I opened it behind the bakery counter while the espresso machine hissed and my mother pretended not to watch my face. By the second paragraph, my stomach had already dropped. Greyline Holdings was moving to take possession within days. Not weeks. Days. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping panic might turn into clarity if I stared hard enough. It did not. Mom set down the tray she was drying and said, very quietly, "There is something your father told me once. About this building." I looked up. What kind of something? She sat at the corner table like the floor had suddenly become unreliable. He said developers had been circling this block for years. Quietly. Buying pieces where they could. He always thought this bakery was worth more to someone else than it ever was to us. That hit harder than the notice. Not just debt. Not just timing. Value. Hidden value. The kind rich people moved for before regular people even knew there was a game. By afternoon, I was standing in the back office with blueprints, tax maps, and a headache pulsing behind my eyes when Ethan walked in. I had not called him. I had not invited him. He took one look at the papers spread across the desk and understood too much too fast. "This is not about missed payments anymore," he said. "No," I answered. "It is about land." His gaze sharpened. He picked up one parcel map, studied the adjacent blocks, then went absolutely still. That scared me more than shouting would have. "What?" I asked. Ethan lowered the page. "Greyline is tied to Victor Lang." The name meant nothing to me until he added, "Colder now, Hayes board member. One of the men trying to force me into line." The room seemed to tilt. "You are saying your corporate war and my family bakery are the same problem now?" Ethan looked at me with a kind of grim certainty I had never seen this naked before. "I am saying they may have always been." I should have thrown him out. Blamed him again. Maybe part of me still did. But another part, the part that was tired of fighting blind, only heard the shape of the truth. I had not just married into danger. I had walked into a trap that might have been laid long before Ethan ever offered me a ring. He stepped closer, careful, like he knew exactly how thin my patience was. "Claire, if Victor moved on the bakery first, it is because he knew this property could pressure me once you were tied to me." My pulse slammed hard against my throat. Then I was not collateral. Ethan's eyes held mine. "No," he said quietly. "You were leverage." And suddenly the distance between us no longer felt like heartbreak. It felt like the edge of a battlefield neither of us could leave anymore. I agreed to meet Ethan in the courthouse annex because by that point pride had become a luxury item, and my family was running out of everything expensive. He was already there when I arrived, standing by a long table under bad fluorescent light, jacket off, sleeves rolled, legal folders spread in perfect rows like he had built order out of chaos by hand. For one second, seeing him like that hurt more than it should have. Familiar. Controlled. Mine, once. I killed that thought before it could breathe. Ethan looked up as I walked in, but whatever he saw on my face made him keep his distance. "Good. I am here to discuss the bakery," I said. "Nothing else." He nodded once. No argument. No apology. Just a folder slid across the table toward me. Transfer records. Shell ownership links. Land valuation maps. And a timeline tying Greyline to Victor Lang. I stared at the documents, then at him. "You are just giving me this?" "It is yours," he said. "It always should have been." That landed harder than any grand speech could have. For the first time since the truth blew my life open, Ethan was not trying to manage me. He was treating me like I had a right to the full board. We worked for the next hour without touching a single personal wound. City council deadlines. Emergency injunction language. Media pressure points. He spoke in clean, exact lines. I pushed back when I disagreed. He let me. Really let me. "If we go public too early, they bury us in procedure," I said. "Then we do not go public first," Ethan answered. "We force disclosure at the hearing and make them react on record." I folded my arms. "You sound very sure for a man whose last strategy involved lying to his wife." He took that without flinching. That is why I am giving you documents now instead of instructions. Silence hit between us after that. Not soft. Not easy. But different. Less like war. More like two people standing in the wreckage deciding where to place the beams. By late afternoon we had a plan. File the temporary challenge. Pull redevelopment maps. Prepare for a city council hearing. Expose the shell structure in public if Victor forced the issue first. As I packed the folders into my bag, Ethan finally said, quiet and careful, "Thank you for coming." I looked at him and felt the old ache move under my ribs. "Do not make this into something it is not," I said. "I am here because they came from my family." His gaze held mine. Steady. Earnest in a way I still did not know what to do with. "I know," he said. "That is why this time I am standing beside you, not in front of you." I should have left then. Clean. Focused. Untouched. Instead I paused just long enough to hate how much those words meant. And that was the real danger. Not Victor. Not the hearing. Not even Ethan's world. The real danger was that working with Ethan again felt natural in all the places my anger had failed to cauterize. I did not hear about Ethan's move from him. I heard about it from a city clerk who looked at me like she had just watched lightning hit the wrong building. I was at the bakery counter sorting invoices when she rushed in with a printed filing in her hand and said, almost breathless, "Miss Bennett, your injunction request just got fast-tracked." I took the paper from her and froze. The legal challenge had been filed in my name. Not Hayes Capital. Not Ethan Hayes. Claire Bennett, petitioner. Attached to it was a surprise motion blocking Victor Lang's redevelopment vote until the ownership structure behind Greyline could be reviewed. My hands went cold. Ethan had moved first. And he had not hidden behind his own power to do it. He had put the first strike in my hands. By noon, the fallout had already started. I learned that Victor had stormed out of a board meeting. I learned that the filing had embarrassed half the men who thought I would fold quietly. I also learned something else. Ethan had burned through political capital inside Hayes Capital to make it happen. Real capital. The kind men like him were raised to protect more fiercely than love. I was still holding that thought when Vivian arrived at the bakery in a black town car that looked like it had never once stopped for anything ordinary. She stepped inside, took in the sugar-dusted counters and chipped tile, and somehow managed to look displeased by oxygen itself. "You have caused a great deal of disruption," she said. "That seems to happen whenever your family notices I exist," I answered. Her gaze sharpened. "Do not mistake Ethan's recklessness for devotion. He is risking the company." I should have enjoyed that. Instead I heard the word risking and felt something in me shift. Then maybe the company should ask why it deserves him more than basic decency does. Vivian went still. Truly still. For 1 second, the woman who had cut me apart at lunch looked almost tired. "You make him forget where the line is," she said quietly. "No," I said. "I think he is finally deciding where it belongs." She left without another word. Ethan never called to tell me what he had done. He never showed up asking for gratitude. He just moved the mountain and let the dust settle wherever it landed. That night, when I locked up the bakery, I found a sealed envelope tucked under the door. No note. No signature. Just copies of the filing, the redevelopment freeze, and a handwritten line on the cover sheet in Ethan's exact, controlled print. "Your name first. Always." I stood there in the dark with the envelope in my hand and my heart doing something dangerously close to thawing. Because for the first time since this story broke me open, Ethan had not tried to win me with words. He had given me back ground beneath my feet. And that was so much harder to resist. The first headline hit before breakfast. Ethan Hayes and Olivia Sterling expected to announce strategic engagement after board stabilization. I read it standing behind the bakery counter with flour on my hands and hope still stupid enough to be alive in my chest. By the second sentence, that hope was already bleeding out. Strategic. Such a clean word for betrayal when rich people did it in public. I told myself it was rumor. Optics. A move from Vivian. I even almost called Ethan. That was my first mistake. The second came an hour later, when reporters started gathering outside the bakery with cameras and questions sharpened like knives. Claire, did you marry Ethan Hayes knowing his real identity? Were you paid to keep the marriage quiet? Was the bakery debt the reason you targeted him? Targeted. The word punched clean through me. Then Mason's leak dropped online. Our contract terms. The 6-month marriage. The payment clause. Every private survival decision I had made stripped of context and thrown to the public like proof of greed. By noon, my phone was full of strangers calling me exactly what Olivia had always wanted the world to see. Gold digger. Fraud. Social climber. Mom locked the front door, but shame does not stop at glass. It gets in through your throat. Through your pulse. Through the way people suddenly look at you like you were calculating all along. I stood in the back kitchen gripping the steel prep table so hard my fingers hurt when Ethan called. I let it ring twice. 3 times. Then I answered just to hear whether his voice still knew how to ruin me. Claire. He sounded tight. Controlled. Too controlled. Do not come here, I said. I am already outside, he answered. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. The engagement story is false, he said. And Mason is the source of the leak. I am handling both. I laughed once, and it came out broken. That is the problem, Ethan. You are always handling things after they explode. Silence hit hard between us. Then his voice dropped lower. Look at me. I should not have gone to the window. I did anyway. He was across the street beside the black car, head lifted, eyes locked on mine through the bakery glass like distance itself was a punishment he was willing to take. I am ending this publicly, he said. All of it. My breath caught. Not because I trusted him. Because part of me wanted to. That was the most dangerous thing of all. Because if Ethan stepped in now and chose the company, or Olivia, or strategy over me one last time, I did not think there would be anything left in me worth saving. The first time Ethan chose me in public, he called me his wife. The second time, he destroyed the safest lie his world had built for him. I watched the press conference on the small TV mounted in the bakery corner, flowers still on my wrists, my mother silent beside me, every camera in the city pointed at the man who had once hidden in my apartment and called himself nobody. Ethan stood behind the podium in a dark suit, shoulders locked, face unreadable except for the strain I knew how to see now. Reporters shouted about Olivia. About the board. About the leaked contract. Then one voice cut through the noise. Did Claire Bennett marry you for money? The whole room seemed to stop on that question. Ethan did not. He looked straight into the cameras and said, clear as a blade, no. Claire Bennett never asked for my money, my name, or my protection. I asked for her. My breath caught so hard it hurt. He kept going. No strategy voice. No polished corporate script. Just truth, finally used like it should have been from the start. I entered that marriage by choice. I hid my identity by choice. Any harm done to her reputation came from my decisions, not hers. A reporter shouted about the engagement rumor. Ethan did not even blink. There is no engagement to Olivia Sterling, he said. There never will be. Across from him, flashed for 1 second on the split-screen feed, Olivia's face went pale and hard. Ethan looked almost exhausted then. Human. Raw in a way I had never seen him allow in public. If blame is due, he said, voice lower now, put it on me. But you will not call my wife a gold digger for surviving a situation I created. My wife. Again. This time not as a shield. As a choice. Beside me, my mother let out one slow breath. I could not move at all. Because Ethan had just done the one thing no one in his world ever did unless it cost them dearly. He had stepped out of the safest version of the truth and put his own name under the weight instead of mine. The reporters kept shouting after that. Investor questions. Board questions. Damage questions. Ethan answered none of them. He stepped away from the podium and left the room in chaos. And standing there in my family's bakery with the TV still flickering and my heart doing something wild and terrified in my chest, I realized the most dangerous part was not that he had defended me. It was that, for the first time in all of this, I believed him. The city council chamber was full before my name was even called, and for once the silence waiting for me did not feel like judgment. It felt like pressure. The kind that either crushes you or turns you into something harder. I stood at the witness table with the bakery deed in my folder, Victor laying 3 seats away pretending calm, and Ethan at the back of the room exactly where he said he would stay. Not beside me. Not in front of me. Behind me. Letting me lead. That mattered more than I was ready to admit. Victor's attorney went first. Redevelopment. Public benefit. Economic growth. He made my family sound like a sentimental obstacle sitting on profitable land. By the time it was my turn, my pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Then I looked up and saw Ethan watching me without moving, without rescuing, without interrupting, and something in me settled. My name is Claire Bennett, I said. And this bakery is not blight. It is not wasted space. It is not a quiet parcel waiting for richer people to rename it. The room changed on that sentence. I kept going. I laid out the shell companies. The hidden transfers. The redevelopment maps Ethan had uncovered and the ownership records our legal team had forced into daylight. Then I told them what Belridge Bakery actually was. A place where my father worked 14-hour days until his hands gave out. A place where neighbors put coffee on tab after funerals and paid it back at Christmas. A place men like Victor only noticed once they could calculate what stood under it. Victor finally snapped and leaned toward his microphone. Miss Bennett is romanticizing a business dispute. I turned to him before anyone else could. No, I said. I am exposing one. That landed hard. The council chair asked for the gray line ownership chain. Victor's side stalled. Our attorney did not. Ethan never moved from the back wall. He did not need to. For the first time in this whole story, no one was talking over me, around me, or for me. They were listening. 30 minutes later, the council voted to freeze the seizure pending a formal investigation into Greyline and the redevelopment filings. Not a final win. But enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to stand. Enough to make Victor's face go tight in a way that felt like justice borrowing my name. When the room finally broke into noise again, Ethan still did not come forward first. He waited until I turned and found him. Only then did he cross the distance between us. His voice was low, steady, almost proud. You did that. I looked at him, at the man who had once hidden everything and was now giving me space to take back my own life, and felt something inside me unlock. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But respect. Real. Earned. Dangerous. Because winning in front of the council felt good. But the way Ethan looked at me after I did it felt even more life-changing, and that was the one victory I still did not know how to survive. The bakery was empty by the time Ethan came back that night. Not closed. Not abandoned. Just still in the rare, fragile way a place gets after surviving public scrutiny and remembering it is allowed to breathe again. I was behind the counter pretending to organize receipts I had already sorted twice when the front bell chimed and he stepped inside. No suit jacket this time. No boardroom armor. Just Ethan, carrying the weight of 100 things he could have said sooner. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then I said the only thing that felt safe enough to touch. You stayed in the back exactly like you promised. Ethan's mouth shifted, barely. You did not need me in front. That landed deeper than praise. I set the papers down. No. I did not. Silence held for a beat, not sharp anymore. Just honest. Ethan came closer, slow enough to let me stop him if I wanted. I did not. He looked at the old pastry case, the scratched floor, the front windows that had held my shame and my fight, and then back at me. The first moment I knew I was in trouble, he said quietly, was not when I married you. It was when I realized I wanted your respect more than your signature. My breath caught. No polished answer would have hit harder than that one did. I leaned back against the counter because suddenly standing felt less reliable. The lie hurt because you mattered, I admitted. That is the part one hated most. Ethan's eyes stayed on mine. No flinch. No defense. I know. Do you? I asked, voice thin at the edges. Because I could have survived your money. Your name. Your world. What I could not survive was being managed by the one person I was starting to trust. That one got to him. I saw it. Clean and unguarded. Ethan stepped closer until the space between us felt like a choice instead of a wound. Then let me say it the right way now, he said. I offered you a contract because I thought control could keep everyone safe. I was wrong. And every time you stood your ground anyway, I understood a little more of what I had actually married. The room went very quiet after that. Not empty. Full. I looked at him and felt the whole shape of us shift again. Not fixed. Not healed. But open. I am not ready to pretend none of it happened, I said. I do not want that, Ethan answered. I just do not want distance to be the only honest thing left between us. I should have answered quickly. I did not. Because the truth was, I did not want that either. And that was the beginning of something far more terrifying than anger. It was hope. Victor Lang fell at 10:43 on a Tuesday morning, and somehow the news reached the bakery before the cinnamon rolls sold out. I heard it first from the muted television over the counter. Federal Review. Internal misconduct. Undisclosed shell ownership. Hayes Capital. Board member Victor Lang forced to resign pending investigation. The anchor kept talking, but I did not need the rest. I felt the shift anyway. The kind that happens when a man who built power out of hidden pressure finally loses control of the dark. By noon, the second shock arrived. Olivia came in alone. No silk smile. No polished crowd behind her. Just a woman standing in my bakery looking tired in a way money could not hide. I came to tell you I am leaving for London, she said. I folded my arms, not out of anger this time. Out of caution. Why tell me? Her laugh was quiet and without humor. Because I spent too long confusing access with choice. She glanced toward the front windows, then back at me. Ethan was never going to choose the company version of his life. I just kept hoping he would choose it over you. That one landed softer than I expected, maybe because it was the first honest thing I had ever heard from her. She left a minute later, taking a whole old tension with her. The third and final shift came that afternoon when Vivian called. Not summoned. Called. Her voice was still cool enough to frost glass, but something under it had changed. The board has voted, she said. Ethan has been offered full control of Hayes Capital. I sat down without meaning to. And? Silence. Then, he did not stay to celebrate. The line went dead after that. I stared at my phone for a long time, pulse moving slow and strange inside me. Because I knew exactly what that meant. Power had finally circled back to Ethan in the clearest form possible. The company. The title. The future his whole world had been trying to force into shape. And instead of standing under the spotlight they had spent years preparing for him, he had walked away from it. Towards something else. Towards someone else. I closed the bakery myself that night. Locked the front door. Turned off the case lights. Waited without admitting that waiting was what I was doing. For the first time in this whole story, I was not chasing answers. I was standing still long enough to see whether Ethan would come to me without strategy, without damage control, without being pushed there by disaster. And when the bell over the door did not ring by 9, I told myself not to care. At 9:03, headlights washed across the front glass. Ethan came in carrying no flowers, no grand gift, no polished excuse. Just a thick envelope in one hand and the kind of stillness that told me this was the most honest he had ever been. He stopped in front of the counter where all of this had started for me, in the middle of flower, invoices, and family history, and set the envelope down between us. "Before anything else," he said, voice low and steady, "this belongs to you." I opened it with fingers that suddenly felt less reliable than my heart. Inside was a partnership deed. Full control of the bakery property returned to my family. No hidden clause. No board strings. No Hayes condition buried in legal language. Just my name. Claire Bennett. Clean. Absolute. I looked up too fast. "What did you do?" Ethan held my gaze. "What I should have done from the beginning. I gave you truth, choice, and your own ground back." That landed so hard I had to grip the counter. Because all story long, men had tried to buy me, move me, manage me, save me, or shame me. And Ethan, finally, was doing none of those things. He reached into his coat pocket then and took out his wedding ring. "The 6-month contract can end today," he said. "If that is what you want, I will sign whatever you need and walk away without making this harder." My throat tightened instantly. Not because I wanted him gone. Because I finally believed he would go if I asked. That was the difference. That was the thing he had never understood before. "Stop," I said, and the word came out rougher than I meant. Ethan went still. I stepped out from behind the counter and looked at him, really looked at him, with every version of us standing there between the silence. The stranger in the hotel hallway. The husband who cleaned shame off my windows before dawn. The liar. The protector. The man who learned too late that control is not the same thing as love. "Stop talking like this is still just a contract," I said. Something broke open in his face then. Small. Human. Unhidden. "Claire," he said, and there was nothing strategic left in my name. "I fell in love with you long before I deserved to say it. With the way you stood there when people tried to make you smaller. With the way you kept choosing dignity even when the world offered you easier prices. I do not want you because I hid behind you. I want you because you are the first person who ever made me understand that standing beside someone is not weakness." Tears burned sharp behind my eyes, but this time I did not hate them. I let them live there. "I did not fall for a billionaire," I said quietly. "I fell for the man who finally stopped acting like I needed one." Ethan let out one breath, almost a laugh, almost relief, and I realized that was the moment everything in me settled. Not because the pain had not happened. Not because the lies had not mattered. But because love, real love, had finally arrived without disguise. I took the ring from his hand and pressed it back into his palm. "Ask me again," I said. His eyes locked on mine. "Claire Bennett," he said, voice unsteady for the first time since I had known him, "will you stay married to me for real this time?" I smiled through the last of the ache. "Yes," I said. "But only if you remember something. Anything." I slipped the ring back on his finger myself. "I am not standing behind you in your world." Ethan's hand closed over mine. Warm. Certain. Chosen. "Good," he said. "Because I was hoping to build one with you instead." And standing there in my family's bakery, with flower in the air and morning still waiting outside the windows, I finally understood what this story had been trying to give me all along. Not rescue. Not status. Not the fantasy of being saved by a powerful man. Something better. The right to be loved without being diminished. The right to choose and still be chosen back. The right to stand beside the man I loved with nothing hidden between us but the future.